Welcome to the Awaken Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. Get ready to create magic and miracles as you lean into your heart's desires. I believe not only does the heart want what it wants, but it knows. This show is a weekly deep dive into what it means to live from an awakened heart. I'll be sharing inspiring stories and real conversations with people just like you, who have turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. My mission is to show you how you too can be connected and heart-centered in every area of your life. Your journey to aligning with more love, more joy, and your wildest dreams come true starts now. Hey there, and welcome to the Awaken Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters, and as I am recording this today, we are in our 5th month of lockdown due to the COVID pandemic. And while things may have slowed down for a lot of us, for a lot of people, a lot of things has sped up, and a lot of things have come to light to be transformed and healed. And one of those things that has been coming a lot to light recently is the huge issue we have with human trafficking and sexual slavery. Now, because of recent media coverage regarding Epstein, a lot more people are becoming aware that this exists. Well, the thing is this has existed a long time, for years and years and years. Human trafficking is a crime that forcibly exploits women, men, and children. According to the UN, human trafficking affects every country in the world, but it's not talked about enough. Human trafficking earns global profits of roughly $150 billion a year for traffickers. $100 billion of which comes from commercial sexual exploitation. It's estimated that internationally there are between 20 million and 40 million people in modern slavery today, the number one lucrative criminal activity in the world. The misconception is that, this happens somewhere else in some far-off, undeveloped country. But the truth is, it's happening here in our country, our cities, and our neighborhoods. Estimates suggest that about 50,000 people are trafficked into the U.S. each year, and over half of the criminal human trafficking cases active in the U.S. were sex trafficking cases involving only children. The average age of a teen that enters the sex trade in the U.S. is 12 to 14 years old. Many victims are runaway girls who were sexually abused as children. Advocates report a growing trend of traffickers using online social media platforms to recruit and advertise targets of human trafficking. Reports of child sexual abuse material online has increased 15,000% over the last 15 years. And 75% of victimized kids reported to being advertised online. And because of all this, it absolutely breaks my heart, and I really needed to bring this topic to the forefront so more people can hear it and become aware of what a problem this is. Now, while some of this might be really triggering, if you're triggered, you can leave the room, have someone else listen to it and tell you what is in the episode, or there's several resources that I've included in the show notes so you can take your time and access those, click on the links, and do a little reading and research on your own time, according to your own comfort level. And that leads me to introducing our next guest, Catherine Ann Wilson, who is the founder and executive director of StopTraffickingus.org, a survivor of the all too common domino effect of early childhood molestation, countless abuse and trauma as a runaway by 12, and sex trafficked by 15, and then a long journey of healing. Catherine calls surviving after surviving. Catherine was determined to thrive after trauma and was earning a 6-figure income by her 30s. And 6 years ago, she started a nonprofit to offer hope, kindness, and understanding. Catherine was invited to the White House to provide input on sex trafficking issues and make recommendations, and invited back again in January of 2020 to attend a meeting in honor of the 20th anniversary of Sex Trafficking Victims Protection Act alongside top political leaders, and she continues today to create awareness and help with reform. Welcome back, everybody, to the Awaken Heart Podcast. Catherine, so happy to have you here today. I'm really honored that you are here on this podcast to really help enlighten us on such a really important topic that's been a problem for so, so long.
Thank you for having me. Number one, I love following you. So I'm really excited to get to
Thank
be.
you.
And this is an important topic, and I'm glad that you and I get to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, so much so. And I know a lot of stuff has come to the surface lately because of COVID, everyone's slowing down. We're not at our normal jobs. We're online. We're seeing more. We're open to more things. And, there was just a march on all these cities about ending trafficking and human slavery. And there's a lot of stuff coming on about Wayfair. And then the Epstein has really brought a lot of stuff to light. But I know that you yourself was a victim of horrendous acts of abuse. I gave a little bit in our intro, but if you could just, tell our audience a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your background.
Sure. It's so cool that I'm far enough along in my healing journey that I'm in a great place to be able to share and hopefully educate and prevent other human beings from going through what I went through. I think at some point in your life, you hit a spot and you say, okay, I am so blessed that it is my responsibility to go back and teach others a way that they can escape, heal, prevent children from going through it themselves, and adults sort of, some tools and tips that worked for me surviving. I call it surviving or your healing journey. Child sexual abuse is as old as time. And I think that the reason why there's so much emphasis on it now is because not that it's new, but because since the internet, the internet can be used for good things and bad things. And some people have used the internet for bad things. We know that 70% of all child pornography is made in the United States, and 90% of that pornography is made in the child's own home. So to which I would say, just sort of a quick caveat, if you are listening and you're a sensitive soul, which isn't, there's no value statement or judgment on that. It's just some people are more sensitive than others. And if you are, then and if you're triggered by any of this conversation, it's okay to go and get a drink of water or go to the bathroom or have somebody else listen to this podcast and then talk to you about it, maybe leaving out some of the graphic stuff. As you and I spoke a few days ago, I'm going to really share the truth, and some of it will be graphic. And we just want to say up front that if you are triggered, you can leave, you can call a friend, take good care of yourself. And there will be resources as a part of this podcast. You're going to put numbers and websites and stuff for people to see that won't have as much triggering information as me as a survivor sort of telling my story. So just wanted to, throw that.
Yes, thank you, Catherine, for letting our audience know that. Yeah, survivor. And you have a really, you told me a little bit about your story about when you were trafficked. And you're saying that a lot of people are not ready or they can't handle what is going on. And I've mentioned too that recently I've gone down the rabbit hole and I've seen things where, and I'm still seeing things where it's horrendous. Like a lot of people knew this was going on. And something that I was really shocked by, actually, I just saw that it wasn't made illegal until 2000, human trafficking, right? And it was Trafficking Protection Act that was passed, making it a federal crime. Like, that just blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, so people will say, what is sex trafficking? So yes, we have the Sex Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and I want to say 2002. But anyway, who made up that term, sex trafficking? And one of the first things that I'm asked about is, what does that term even mean? And so I think that's a really great place to start. There's an umbrella term, which is human trafficking. And human trafficking actually encapsulates three different things. One of them is labor trafficking, which is something that any state that has, well, it's all over the United States, but any state that has a lot of tourism and stuff, maybe apple pickers, produce pickers, potato pickers, frequently they'll have a hospitality I met someone who was a victim of labor trafficking, and he was used at a 5-star hotel. He was in this little tiny room that was a closet with, 5 guys, and they were on call 24/7. They weren't allowed to leave. The person who managed them had their visas. So there was somebody who was actually a professor at an Ivy League school, and he and his wife had a nanny, had her visa, and she was only allowed to go to church by herself on Sunday, and that's it. And it was at church that she told somebody, hey, I'm not allowed to leave the house. And Homeland Security was able to, get her out of that situation.
Whoa.
But, it's sort of crazy. So that's labor trafficking. And then there's organ trafficking, where people will, steal other people's vital organs and then sell them. And then there's sex trafficking. And I guess that one of the things that people will say to me is sex trafficking where somebody takes a van full of Mexicans or Asians or Russians and then brings them to strip mall massage places? Is that, people are confused about what exactly is sex trafficking. So I'll set the record straight. All of the stuff in human trafficking is when an individual is forced through fraud, force, coercion to trade an organ, labor, sex for some sort of gain for that third party person. There's one person selling another person, forcing them to do it for some sort of gain. That could be cash, it could be services, it could be rent, it could be drugs, some sort of gain. The difference between prostitution and sex trafficking is what we would consider prostitution. If you are under the age of 18 in the United States, that is automatically considered sex trafficking. So you're under 18 and you're prostituting, whether or not there's another person involved or not, that is considered sex trafficking. You can be sex trafficked as an adult if it meets the criteria of you have another person, we would call that person a pimp, madam, somebody forcing you to do this. Are there people who legitimately are independent and trading sex for, tuition money or whatever? Does that happen? Absolutely. It sure does happen. But does it happen enough that prostitution should be legalized? Other survivors and myself say no. The vast majority of people who are prostituting themselves, for lack of a better term, do fall under that umbrella of being forced to do so. And the other survivors and I do not feel that the law should be changed for that small percentage of people who are legitimately, hey, I'm a grown-up, I'm choosing to trade sex for money, and I should be allowed to do that. Yeah. So we say no to sex work. Yeah, we don't think that it should be legalized, and kind of crazy that it's even a thing, but anyway, we go. So in the world of sex trafficking, we know that the average age into sex trafficking is between 12 and 14 years old. We know the vast majority of those kids were sexually abused prior. And people will ask me, like, why is this even a thing, right? And it's a thing because of money. The global profits, it's estimated that it's $150 billion a year industry. So human trafficking, labor, sex, organs is estimated globally $150 billion. We know that $100 billion is from sexual exploitation or sex trafficking, and that's according to the International Labor Organization. So we know that if you, just to sort of give a visual for the amount of money, if you took Google, Intel, Nike, Starbucks, and combined their annual income, that's how much money was made in sex trafficking in the United States.
Oh my God.
So it is big money. I remember once somebody said, aren't prostitutes just drug addicts that are having sex with other people to pay their, for their drugs. Now, it's true wherever drugs are being sold, people are being sold, and wherever people are being sold, drugs are being sold. Actually, sex trafficking in the world of money, sex trafficking is the number one most lucrative criminal activity in the world. I mean, it beat drugs and guns. Sex trafficking is massive. One of the ways that pimps keep a victim on that leash, people will say, well, nobody's holding a gun to your head. When you go to the hotel, why aren't you sneaking out the back door? Why aren't you running for help? Why aren't you you're a big girl. Why is this a problem, right? The grooming for brainwashing starts very young. Again, 12 years old. I've got grandchildren, 12 years old. They're still babies.
Mm-hmm.
They've been sexually abused prior to that, and we know the vast majority of them have been. That sort of desensitization, that feeling of responsibility, maybe a pimp is forcing them by saying, hey, you need to take care of your family. You're the oldest, you're responsible, they need you. And I've never met anybody more loyal than a child. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you don't do this, then I'm going to have your sister do this. If you don't do this, I'm going to kill your family members. If you don't do this, I'm going to kill you. And then there's the boyfriending. And so the two greatest motivators to make human beings do anything is love and fear. So maybe the madam or the pimp will use the fear tactics that I just mentioned, or maybe they'll use love by saying, if you love me, you'll do this. So for instance, one pimp will have a school-age kid go into his junior high school or high school and say, pick the most vulnerable girl that's good looking, befriend her, buy her gifts, then, have sex with her. Now that person can either say, build this romance with this victim and say, okay, now do this for us, or put that girl in a vulnerable position, take pictures of her and her friends, give her drugs, have them do sexual acts, something that would really humiliate them, and then say, I'm going to show these pictures to your parents, to your grandparents, to your teachers, whatever. If I'm going to put it all over Facebook, I'm going to put it all over Instagram if you don't do what you're told. Mm. So we could spend 3 hours just talking about the manipulative ways that they get these human beings in the first place. We know that it's driven by money. We know that drugs are usually involved. I've never been addicted to drugs or alcohol, but from what I understand from some of my survivor sisters, when you're coming down off of a heroin or whatever, meth or something, you get sick, like the worst flu you can imagine. And so these pimps will give the girls a little bit of drugs to make them happy enough. I don't know what the right word is, to be able to be sexual over and over and over again. And then when they start to come down and get sick, they're driven back to the pimp to get a little more of that drug. Mm-hmm. And when, it's interesting when I try to figure out ways of explaining it to, people who haven't been trafficked. But remember when you're in love with somebody and you're just like head over heels in love and you can't wait to make love to them and you want to make love to them in the morning and you're thinking about them in the afternoon and you can't wait to make love to them in the evening, right? Now imagine being sexual with that same person that you're just crazy in love with, but 25 times a day. Oh, it's not somebody you love, but it's somebody that stinks. It's somebody that's mean and rough to you. It's somebody that's not kind. It's somebody that's demeaning you because that's what they're into. It's somebody, it doesn't matter. They don't care if you have a headache. They don't care what you like and don't like. They don't care what your preferences are. They own you and you're going to do what you're told or pay the consequences. Mm. So when somebody says, well, she told me she liked it. She told me that she just had a high sex drive. Like, really? think it through. That's what you wanted to hear. She told you what she thought you needed to hear so she could do her job, so that she met the criteria for her pimp, so that she didn't get beaten or some awful thing happening to those that she loves.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts so young. And I try to give an example that like a soccer mom would understand, So if you can imagine before COVID, going to the mall with, a little group of 13-year-olds. And, there's the mom, and she's got 6 13-year-old girls, and they're running all over the place, and they're all dressed up, and, and they're, having the time of their lives. And there's a man or a woman, doesn't matter, watching the girls the whole time they're at the mall watching. And then he or she goes into the group, had already picked out one of the girls as a potential target, and then bumps into that child and then says, "Oh, excuse me." And then when the child looks up at this adult, the adult says, "Wow, you've got the most beautiful green eyes." Now, the girl could give one of two responses. She could look down and say, "No, I don't." Or she could look up with a big smile on her face and say, "Yeah, I got her from my mom," and pounce away.
Mm-hmm.
That is all that potential offender needed, right? To know who was the most vulnerable, who needed some compliments, who needed a couple of gifts, who needed to be treated really special before she is lured into his harem of slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So simple. I remember I was at, a few years back, we had the Governor's Summit on Human Trafficking, and it was a great turnout. It was their first one. It was really well attended, and I was training for a competition at the time, so I had to hit the gym before the first meeting. So I was working out, and the place was dead, and the manager said, "What's going on? There's so many people here. What's the deal?" And I said, the Governor's Summit on Human Trafficking. And he's leaning back in his chair with his hands behind his bed, his head, sort of rocking back and forth. And he's like, "Yep, that would never happen to my little girl. She's 12 years old. She's a tomboy. Like, we are so close. We tell each other everything. No pimp could ever come near my daughter." And I'm usually kinder than this. But I was tired and sort of impatient, and I said, "Oh, you guys are really close. She would do anything for you." Yep, we tell each other everything. Really? Well, what would happen if an offender took her, pushed her up against a wall, looked into her eyes, and said, "If you don't do what I want you to do right now, I know your dad's route to work to and from. I know that big hill at the end of the retreat. I know how to cut his brakes. And your daddy's going to be gone forever if you don't do da-da-da-da-da-da-da." Do you think your daughter would comply, or do you think that she wouldn't comply? And his jaw just like,
Wow.
And I don't try to be that, I was just trying to make a point.
Good point.
Your daughter would do anything for you. Children would do anything for those that they love. And predators know that, and they use that against them. And speaking of predators, we know that predators need 3 things to be successful. And there's a lot that we can't do and we don't have control over. But really, just sort of so people know, they need 3 things. You need somebody who has the inclination to abuse. And there are people who are born with the inclination to abuse, and that there are people who are just doing to other people what was done to them. So somebody who has the inclination for whatever reason to abuse, and maybe they're sexually attracted to toddlers, maybe they're sexually attracted to that pre-adolescent time, maybe they're whatever. So they've got the inclination to abuse. The second thing is they need a vulnerable child. And then the vulnerable child, what child isn't vulnerable? Now, the truth is, children of color this offense happens to them more than other children. The truth is, the children who have been in the system, care, detention center, whatever, there's a greater instance for them. But I don't want anybody to think that just because their child isn't of color or isn't in the system, that they're safe, because they're not. I'm not of color, and I wasn't in the system, and I was a victim.
Mm-hmm.
Generally leave that part out, but the truth is there are higher cases for those two demographics. The third thing is access. And this is where we have the greatest power. Access. This is where if we all stepped up and became superheroes for the children, you don't have to be the superhero for the children all over the world. Just be the superhero for the children that are in your world. You know, the ones that are your neighbors, your nieces, nephews, children, grandchildren, you know, just those children. If you were the superhero for those children to block access, you would have a profound impact on countless not lives, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we have the power. And that's what the Catholic Church initially, and then the Boy Scouts, and now these other organizations are going, hey, we need to have policies and procedures in place to block access from predators, offenders, from having access to the kids in the first place, so they don't sexually abuse them, so that they don't become more vulnerable to being trafficked. But not only trafficked, it's also kids who are incarcerated. We know 94% of all the women in prison were sexually abused. In 5 children. That's not 1 in 5 children, you know, in Florida, or 1 in 5 children in New York City, or 1 in 5 children, you know, in Oregon. That's 1 in 5 children from coast to coast are sexually abused before they're grown up. It is, you know, Huffington Post was saying we're at a pandemic level of abuse. And who abuses the children? People who abuse children are the ones that are in the inner circle, you know, people that those children know and trust, generally speaking. It's not the stranger danger. It is the people that they know and trust. And now with COVID, who are they being quarantined with? The greatest superhero for children, who discloses child abuse more than any other person? Teachers. Teachers are the ones. So I was recently on a call with the Department of Health and Human Services and a bunch of educators and prosecutors, and we were looking at the graphs over the last few years. And by far, it was teachers. It was like 35% teachers, and then like the neighbor telling was like 5%, and like the parent was like 1%. I mean, it was just crazy. First responders, neighbors, clergy, group leaders, you know, all that. By far, it was teachers. Guess who hasn't been going to school since March? So, of course, child abuse, elder abuse, animal abuse, domestic violence is the roof right now, and there will be a massive fallout once the veil starts, you know, lifting, and everybody sort of comes out of their self-quarantine, so we can start, you know, dealing with the healing journey of a lot of these kids.
And they're more online. Like, I forgot what the number was, but there's like double the number because people are working and they're online and they're so accessible online. And
well, you're right. It used to be that, you know, a kid would come home and that would be their safe place. If they were bullied at school, or, you know, whatever was going on in the world, unless they were being abused at home, let's just say they weren't. You know, your home, when you walk through your doors, that is your sanctuary. That is your family's anchor. That's your mooring. That's your safe place. And what parents don't realize is those smart devices that we have, if it is the iPad, if it's your computer, if it's their smartphone, or if it's the gaming without parental controls, if there's no parental controls in place, then what the state police told me was, it's like you took your child to the worst city, the worst park, right? Like this really awful area, in the middle of the night on a Saturday night and dropped your kid off and walked away. That's the equivalent of letting your child get online without any sort of parental control. Speaking of parental control, I've done numerous, when I get asked to speak somewhere, I try to bring my A game. And so I'll bring somebody from Homeland Security, I'd bring somebody from the district attorney's office, I'd bring a sex therapist, and then me as a survivor, and then we would present. I figure if I get these people, I want to bring the A game and teach them as much as I possibly could. So Peter DiMarzio is the victim's advocate for Homeland Security for all of New England. And I said, Peter, if there was one thing that I could tell an audience, what is it that you would like me to share? And he said, share this story. A few years ago, there was gaming. We were just speaking about gaming. So there was somebody pretending to be a kid, and he would play, I don't even know what the game was, but he was playing a game with children, and he would pretend to be a child, and he would tell them, hey, I see your IP address on your game. It's popping up on my screen. And the kid's like, what is that? What are you talking about? And he said, oh, it tells me exactly where you live. It gives me all the information about your parents. Like, if I wanted to, I could even like go into your parents' bank account and like take all their money. Well, the kid doesn't own that computer. Mommy and daddy does. And so the kid is really freaking out and wants to make sure he doesn't get into trouble. And so the guy would say, I can fix it for you if you want me to. Just give me your email address, and I'll just email you something, and I'll help you out. And so the kid would be like, yeah, and give the email address. And then the guy would send an email and say, now I have you. I have everything, and I will take your parents' money, and I will do all this. If you don't turn on Skype, here's how to turn on Skype. Now, make sure no one's home. Stand in front of the computer. Take off your clothes. Hey, do you have any other children in your house? Bring other children up. Do you have neighbor children? Bring your friends over. Don't tell them I'm watching. And totally tell them what to do. When Homeland Security was called and they found this guy, it was 700 children in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts that he had victimized. Wow. When they found him, he was in Canada and he was in school to be a pediatrician. So, parents will say, how do you know? Like, how do you know who is a predator? How do you know, is it that weird one or whatever? And I tell them, next time you're in a group of people, which, again, with COVID, not so much, but I have to come up with a different story. But imagine a group of people. And now I want you to look around that room and tell me who's straight. Mm-hmm. Right? That is how, you take 100 people from anywhere, you can have 100 people. A certain percentage of them are going to be heterosexual. Certain percentage of them are going to be bisexual. A certain percentage is going to be whatever, right? But the sexual preference isn't a look. Mm-hmm. It's a sexual preference. And the people who have the sexual preference for children look like everybody else. They are everywhere, just like heterosexuals are. They have jobs, as we know, like they have jobs in, the United States, Olympic gymnastic team, men's pro football, Boy Scouts, any sort of clubs. And who do they like? If you like cooking, where do you go? If you like sports, where do you go? If you like having sex with children, where do you go? Camps. We know that the faith-based organizations are a huge target right now, at least right before COVID. They were flocking to the faith-based organizations to take advantage of their forgiving nature and access to groups of children. And one of the world experts, Victor Veith from Zero Abuse Project, was saying that they caught one guy who went to like 10 different churches, and he would tell the 10 different churches that he had a little something on his record, but it was a misunderstanding, but Jesus has forgiven him. and that if they believe in the healing power of Jesus, then he should be allowed to repent and prove himself by helping out in the children's choir. Right? And they do not cover this when people in clergy, when they go to school, they don't cover this in seminary, regardless of the religion. This isn't a part of the curriculum, dealing with sex offenders who are coming in a manipulative way to get to the children. They don't cover this in seminary, right? So that's why education is so important to the process. And just sort of a side note, that is my 2020 plan. So last year we did the 3-day child sexual abuse prevention conference. We offered CEUs. We educated over 80 law enforcement, therapists, doctors. I mean, it was a huge turnout. It was really successful. And I brought in national speakers, and I had local speakers as well. But I brought in Victor Veith. Victor Veith is with Zero Abuse Project, but he had formerly been prosecutor for the White House on it was crimes against children. So this guy is like one of the number one guys in the country. And so I said, what can I do? What would save the most amount of children? How could I have the greatest impact? And he said, Catherine, you got to get to the faith-based organizations and get them to update their policies and procedures, like the Boy Scouts and the Catholic Church. They have got checks and balances, man, because they had to, right? So before you have to get to those faith-based organizations, those temples, churches, synagogues, and get them to change the way they do things, make some carburetor adjustments to keep children and vulnerable adults safe in those organizations. So I've done that, and the rollout is happening now. We've sort of had to pivot because of COVID. So a lot of it is emails now. There's 250 churches that are my primary target right now, and then we'll expand that. But it's it's a problem. But the cool thing is that we can all make a difference by blocking access, by watching to see what adult likes to spend more time with children, what adult do children act like they're uncomfortable around. How can we educate ourselves from darkness to light? And I know you'll be posting a lot of these websites, but there are great specific education links out there that can tell you exactly what to look for, exactly what to do. But the Cliff Note version is go with your gut. I can't tell you how many people will say, and here's a story from one of my girlfriends. One of my girlfriends, I'm 56. She's a little older than I am. So her and her 2 older sisters and her brother were visiting their mom for typical potluck get together once a summer, and the whole family, and do something fun. So they got together, and the brother was outside, and the mom and the older sisters were just chatting, washing dishes and chatting in the kitchen. And the sisters were saying, hey, our brother, I'll call him Bob, have you guys noticed, how close Bob is to his new stepdaughter? She's 14. I heard that they went camping like by themselves. That's kind of weird. Oh, Bob, he's, really cares about the underdog. I know, but don't you think that's weird? They're actually having this conversation that something's not right, that they're noticing this extra close relationship between their brother and the 14-year-old stepdaughter. Nobody says anything to the stepdaughter. Nobody says anything to Bob. 2 years later, when the stepdaughter's 16, Bob's arrested for child molestation, right? Because people don't want to be wrong. If I'm wrong, oh, that can't be. He's a great guy. He would never do that. Being able to have that 30 seconds of bravery to say something. And if you're not a mandatory reporter, then you can report anonymously. If your gut says that something's wrong, 99% of the time, when was your gut wrong, right? When was your gut wrong? And let's say your gut was wrong 50% of the time. That means you got a 50% chance of being right, and what's at stake. So when your gut says, I'm watching my neighbor's daughter hang out with an older guy, and I'm noticing that she's starting to wear expensive clothes that I know her family can't really afford. I'm noticing she's on her phone all the time. I'm noticing she looks stressed out. I'm noticing she looks tired. Something's not right. When you have that feeling, something right, my district attorney friend would politically correct. He would say, you should call your police or Department of Homeland Security. I will tell you that you should call your district attorney's office and talk to your assistant district attorney. And, I would just go straight to the district attorney and say, hey, there's something. And here's why I tell you to do that. I used to be in sales long ago. And if I went to the boss's boss's boss, and the boss said, well, this really isn't my department, but I'm going to give you down to the boss. When the boss's boss's boss gives me to the boss, that boss is going to take my call and is going to talk to me because it came from higher up. Mm-hmm. If the low end boss says, hey, boss, will you look at it? Not so much. Mm-hmm. Not so much. It's better to be passed down than try to make your way up. So go as high as you can, report. You can report anonymously, but I think you'll have more success, that way.
So you're saying to go straight to the DA if you have this really...
Yeah. That's what, if your gut says something's... So here's the way it works. I was recently speaking. I was a privilege to do this. So in the state of Maine, we have, state troopers, and we have a specific section of state police that are crimes against children. And just a little bragging thing. Some of our lead people in this area are used for national and sometimes international crimes against children. They're so good that their resources are often borrowed by other states. So it's a pretty cool organization. And so they were speaking to, 50 or so forensic nurses at a hospital, and I was asked to join them. So it was really cool. So it was them and me, and we were presenting to these forensic nurses. And one of the crimes against children experts, I'm not sure if he was with FBI, but anyway, so he said, I want to put this in terms that you guys will all understand. If every police officer in the United States stopped doing their job and only did crimes against children on the internet, we wouldn't even make a dent.
Oh my God.
That is the level that we're at. Mm-hmm. Huge. So when people call the Department of Health and Human Services because they suspect something, okay, it's kind of like going to an emergency room. I don't know what it's like where you're at, but if you go to an emergency room nowadays, you have to wait hours because unless you're bleeding out, you're not a priority. They have to prioritize, right? Who is death is imminent, right? They need to take care of them. Okay, whose limb, is falling off? Okay, we got to take care, right? It's priority. It's the same thing with children. There are so many cases that the Department of Health and Human Services are dealing with that are awful, blow your freaking mind, awful, disgusting, horrible, right? And they're dealing with that. So, little Susie, you've got a spanking, is sort of low on the totem when the drug addict mom hasn't cleaned out the trash in 6 weeks and the 2-year-old is eating trash off the floor with maggots. That's kind of on the priority, okay? So here's how they do it. How many calls have they gotten? So if they've only gotten one call on Susie, but 10 different people called on little Freddie, they're going to go to little Freddie first. Mm-hmm. So that's just to add to why it is so important. If your gut says something, then say something. Something. And then if other people see something and say something, then there's hope that little Susie or little Freddie might have an intervention. His family might have an intervention and be able to get that child the help that they need. With that being said, I want to talk about resilience. Do we have time?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So resilience. So if I got hit by a bus I would want your listeners to understand adverse childhood experience. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. You guys can Google it and check it out. And actually, I think I gave you the link. You'll put that up too. Mm-hmm. But what we know about adverse childhood experiences, basically what that is it is a rating system for how much trauma a child has gone through before the age of 18. And it's not how many times they were physically beaten. Physical violence is one, that's a score. Sexual abuse is one. It's not, I was sexually abused 5 times, so I have a score of 5. It is, I was sexually abused, that's a score of 1. Not being fed, food insecurity, that is a score of 1. So together, that would be 3 so far, right? So depending on what the score is, they've learned to correlate the score with the development of your physical biology. So we know that, your body as an infant, right? So in your mother's womb, growing, infant growing, toddler growing, oh my gosh, 2 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. When do you stop growing? I think the brain stops. I think in Italy, they don't let you have a driver's license until you're 21, I think.
Wow.
I think that's when the brain, and I want to say 27. So it's somewhere around then before you're done. And actually, it's funny that I said 27 because I don't know if it's Texas. It might be Texas. Who knows where it is. But anyway, I saw this news. It was fascinating that if you were arrested for a crime and you were over 18, but you weren't 27 yet, if you were in that period of time, that you wouldn't go to jail, you would go to like a rehabilitation place. But if you were over 27, jail for you, babe, because they feel like that's it. You are who you are. But if you are under that you still have a chance to change because you're still meldable. Mm-hmm. You're not done. You're not wet cement yet. And, you're not hardened cement yet. You're still sort of wet and moldable. So your body, your biology is growing and evolving and developing. And during that time, if you are traumatized to a certain degree, it's sort of like a recipe. If you were abused at a certain level and you didn't have anybody that had your back, well, then your lifespan would be decreased by an estimated, I think it's 20 years. Your body, typically this group of people with a high ACE score have difficulty functioning. So there's somebody in your office, for example, who's always late. There's always some sort of drama in their home. They're always sick. They can't seem to get their issues under control. That is a typical high ACE score. Somebody that in the hospital world, they call them frequent flyers, people who are constantly coming to the emergency room because they can't get their blood sugar under control. They can't get their blood pressure under control. They can't get their ding, 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 ding medication under control. That's because how their physiology responds and reacts to drugs of any kind are different than a normal person because they haven't fully developed. It's fascinating. Fascinating. Now, let's say same ACE score, but they had a grandmother who read to them, or an aunt or a neighbor who read to them and said, I know you're in a difficult situation at home, but I believe in you. And let's read stories about resilience. Let's watch that little kid movie, Brave, and that's going to be you. This is tough, but you've got it. I believe in you. I believe in you. I believe in you. Now, that person, they're going to have trouble with a bunch of stuff. And maybe they're going to, their life expectancy maybe is going to be 10 years less instead of 20 years sooner than the rest of the world. It's not going to be as bad. So, for instance, 2 men, I'll just say men, 2 men go to war. They both have a similar background. They both have the same number for an ACE score. One of them, they both come back from war. One guy, can't leave his house. He's agoraphobic. His post-traumatic stress disorder is off the freaking chart. He doesn't leave his house. He's taking a bunch of medication, but it doesn't seem to help. The other guy, same A score, same violence that he saw at war. He comes home. He's devastated. He needs support. He's taking antidepressants, anti-anxiety, dealing with post-traumatic, but he's able to like get a footing and start to thrive after a period of time. What's the difference between the two of them? One person had somebody in their life that believed in them, and the other one didn't. It is amazing. So think you can't make a difference. Just that, you see somebody and and you don't want to get involved because it's Jerry Springer and you don't want to get sucked in and you've got your own problems and blah, 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 blah. Well, at least when you see that child, if you don't think that there's abuse that you need to report going on, at least tell that child, I've been watching you and I have this gift. You want to know what my gift is? Kid says, yes. I have this way of being able to tell children who are really going to go to school and get a job and like they're going to be happy and healthy in their life. And you are that child, right? Just, they will never forget that.
Someone that believes in them.
It stays in them. So those are just a few of the things that people need to understand and take responsibility for. Not only taking responsibility for yourself. That was one of the things that as a survivor myself that I see on TV, like with the Epstein thing or those 3 women in Ohio or whoever, I think that there's this, or maybe just somebody who resents their mommy or daddy or whatever, there's this thing inside of us that says, we'll be okay when. We'll be okay when we get justice, when we get an apology, when, whatever. Or this sense of entitlement, like, life sucks. My life sucked, so I'm going to make your life suck, or all these other sort of dysfunctional things. And, that's just not a way to be happy, right? So there's nothing we can do about what was done to us when we were little kids, but how we respond to it. Viktor Frankl wrote this little skinny book called A Man's Search for Meaning. And that was just a fantastic book. He was a very prominent Jewish psychiatrist right before World War I. And right before the whole Holocaust thing happened. And, his family was taken from him. His family was murdered. His gold teeth were ripped out of his mouth. He was starved. He was beaten. He was tortured. And he wrote a little book about it called A Man's Search for Meaning. And he said, we can't control like all this other stuff, but what we can control is our response and reaction to it. And so I love that. And I took full responsibility for my own healing. I didn't get justice. My pimp didn't go to jail. My predators didn't go to jail. I never got an apology. I didn't get any money. There's this great Netflix series. I don't like the way it ends, but I liked everything else, called Unbelievable. And all the stuff that happened to her, and it really was, but that is, even though it seems unbelievable, all that stuff really did happen. But at the end, she got this large settlement and got to start her life over somewhere else. And I'm like, that's not reality, okay? But taking responsibility for your own happiness and letting everybody else off the hook. I was, molested as a child in first grade. That was like, blood in the water of sharks, and like every predator from certain radius around me, babysitters, friends of the family, runaway, choked to unconsciousness a couple of times, people trying to actually kill me, raped, beaten, hogtied, just like awful, 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 brought into sex trafficking at 15 years old. Prior to that, I said yes to that because I was eating out of dumpsters, prior to that. Just a really awful, my first 20 years of life, just around it, was the worst of humanity. It was, it was awful. It was the worst in human beings was done to me. And that was in West Palm Beach, Florida. I guess, Epstein, I don't know if Epstein was alive, doing his thing then or not, but, the things that I saw, the chicken hawks, the adult men who have this whole subculture of trading, getting little boys and like trading them. Like I'm watching one old man give another old man a little boy, walk into a bedroom. I'm watching one old man have sex with this little boy. The stuff that I saw. And then the next 20 years was what I call surviving the surviving. And I'd mentioned war earlier. Anybody who's gone to war knows that the real hell doesn't begin until you're safe. Mm. When you're safe, that is when the post-traumatic stress starts. That's when the night terrors, because it wasn't safe. When your life is threatened, I wasn't menstruating. I was so malnutritioned. I wasn't menstruating. When your life is in danger, you're not having anxiety attacks then. It's when, okay, I'm safe. Then the fallout, the emotional fallout starts. And I wasn't doing drugs and alcohol on the street. And I could not, because I couldn't tolerate any of the drugs or alcohol. And then the 20 years of surviving the surviving with this awful night terrors and debilitating panic attacks and all this stuff, I couldn't tolerate anti-anxiety or anti-depression medication. So I remember everything that was done to me. And then I had to white knuckle all of the side effects of that. And I had to get really creative on my healing journey. I had to try everything. So rebirthing, one-on-one therapy, group therapy, landmark education, the Hoffman Institute, the Survivors Weekend at the Meadows, like art therapy, Mandela's, like, oh my gosh, like every sort of, I've taken every personality test imaginable and all these different things, just trying to get comfortable in my own skin. Mm-hmm. That was my motivator. The thing that pushed me was I had hope. And I got hope from listening to different self-help, different things that I would hear, if it was Tony Robbins interviewing all these different people or whatever, and people would share their stories and how they had overcome, and historically overcome these huge things. And so I had just a little spark of hope. And then I had my own children. I had my children young. And my motivation was, how can I be a good mom? Can't be a good mom when I'm up all night, having night terrors. So I was studying and reading how to be a good mom, how to be a good wife, how to get comfortable in my own skin. So 20 years of hell, 20 years of surviving the surviving. And then when I was in my 30s, I didn't go to high school. I skipped school most of junior high school. I got a GED, and just one positive thing after another happened because I worked really hard and I was willing to work. I was willing to do whatever it took. I didn't feel like the world owed me. I was like, I need a job. I'm going to clean their house. I'm going to clean up dog poop out of those people's backyard because that pays really well. I'm going to go to vocational school. I'm going to, whatever. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And next thing you know, I'm in my early 30s and I'm making a 6-figure income as a national sales manager. Mm-hmm. The owner, there's 2 owners of the company. One owner thought that I was white trash and didn't want to pay me a salary, but the other person said, I believe in her. So the other guy said, okay, 100% commission. That's it. Wow. Came the highest paid, most successful person in the country in my field, and then I bought I had all these vision boards of what I wished for and what I wanted. And I was living in Kansas and I always wanted to live on a lake in Maine. At 40 years old, I put $50,000 down on a $347,000 home that was 5 feet off of a lake in Maine. And it took me 3 years to believe it was mine. It was not really mine. But learning how to be in relationships, learning how to be sexual, learning how to deal with sexual energy, when to use it, when not to use it. I had to get up to zero. I had to learn how to do everything because I had been on the street from 12 to 17. I didn't know how to do anything. So there isn't justice. It's not coming. There isn't an apology. It's not coming. There isn't an entitlement. It's not coming. The answer to inner happiness and self-growth and fulfillment in life is not out there. Everything is inside of yourself. The only way to true happiness is within. Singer wrote this great book called The Untethered Soul. And it's about, letting those wounds go. And you have to reveal them and feel them and heal them and move on.
Samsara.
Move on. So it is possible. It has been, oh my gosh, I think I'm at the 12-year mark now without a single panic attack or post-traumatic stress disorder or night terror, 56 years old. And all those years that I wished a karma-free death. Like when you're driving down the highway and that 18-wheeler comes beside you and you're like, oh my God, I could just like slide right underneath this guy, like, Smokey and the Bandit, oh my God. And just wishing that they would just run my car over, or wishing that I would just, something would happen. I would have some sort of quick death without karma, thinking now I wouldn't be, the joy that I have right now in my life is phenomenal. I've never been happier or healthier, or I have a great relationship. I have, that little house that I bought. I have a much better, beautiful home now, amazing friendships, like beyond what I could have wished for myself. And how I got there was the long journey home to myself. I was almost 50 when I started my nonprofit. My past, like me talking about this now, this isn't what I did. My past was on a need-to-know basis. I had spent countless thousands of dollars, countless, thousands of hours healing. I didn't want to talk about it or relive it, or, it wasn't my idea of a fun conversation. So anybody knowing about my past was a need-to-know basis until I started volunteering at the Long Creek Youth Facility. It's a jail for kids in southern Maine. We only have one for boys and girls. And I went to volunteer there, and I was like, oh my gosh, these kids are talking about survival sex, sexual exploitation, sex trafficking. Is this stuff really happening 35 years later? And I had already, made my money, had my home, had my relationship, and they wanted me to be interviewed on the 6:00 news. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my friends don't know the whole story. So I talked to my husband, I talked to my family, I talked to my friends, and they were all like, hey, if your story will help others, if what you know can save other children, then go for it, green light. So right out of the gate, I started volunteering there with kids at risk. I was on the girls unit. And then next thing you know, I'm being invited to speak with the FBI on panels, and I'm being invited to speak with international experts. And I'm trying to understand what people do and don't know about sex trafficking. And I joined all these little groups, and it seemed to me at the time that the groups were having a meeting about having another meeting about having another meeting. And I'm short and I'm old and I'm tenacious. And I don't want to have a meeting. I want to go out and talk to people. You guys all understand the problem, but the people who need to understand the problem don't. So there's 1.3 million people in the state of Maine, and I'm going to talk to all of them somehow. And so for the last 6 years, I have been talking all over the place, and, I've made a massive impact. Last year, I was voted one of the top outstanding women in the state of Maine. I did the 3-day child sexual abuse prevention conference. I was invited to the White House last October to speak in a meeting. There's about 40 of us from all over the country who wanted to talk about sex trafficking. And, let's have a conversation. And then after that, I was invited back in January for the 20th anniversary of the Victims Protection Act that you mentioned earlier, which was amazing. I got to talk to Pence and Barr, and I stand beside Trump and get my picture taken with Ivanka. And no matter what anybody says, Ivanka is doing great, great work in this human trafficking, child exploitation world. And that was just like a thrill. And then for Victor Veith to give me the mission to get the faith-based organizations to update their policies and procedures, that's been huge. So it's been, this past 6 years has been quite a journey. And I am one person who doesn't get paid to do this, who isn't, doesn't have staff and affiliations. And this is what I was able to do. So my ask of people to just be a superhero for yourself and your family and the children who are in your realm, that is easy. That's easy. And you'll change the world if you choose to accept that mission.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Catherine, that's amazing. It's beautiful. You're such an inspiration, and you're helping so many lives. And like you said, you pulled yourself out and you took responsibility for your own life, and you learned that healing is within yourself and you have the power within yourself. And now you're showing all these other people, how to come out of this darkness, because it's our stories. It's our greatest pain that someone else is going to cling to, and it's going to save them. It's going to help them say, oh, she did it. And they're going to grasp to that. And then it's going to help them out of their own darkness. And just like you said, it's like taking care of the people around you. And if you see someone that is not doing so well, like take them under your wing and help them. And that's one of the greatest differences that we can make, little steps, those that are around us. It's just such a disheartening thing that has happened, that, like you said, it's always happened for thousands of years. A lot of this stuff was like, done in ritualistic ceremonies, and it was done in villages, and it was done and all that. Now it's gone underground, but now it's becoming so much, it's been being brought back up to the surface again to be transferred and healed. And it's such a huge problem. Such a huge problem.
People have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what you said to me the other day about if people would just stop having sex with children, that the whole world would change.
Absolutely. And Victor Veith had talked about that. It's a generational thing. And if people would just stop having sex with children, like right now, like if everybody in the whole world would just stop having sex with children, the new young people who grow up to be adults won't be so screwed up, right, from the high ACE score, and they'd be able to think and participate in the evolution of our communities. The collective, we're only as healthy as our sickest person in our collective, as our collective meaning all human beings everywhere. And if we stopped having sex with children, oh my gosh, like it would have a profound impact. I think Victor said within 3 generations, the dharma from that would be gone.
That's incredible. And so how could somebody that finds themselves in this position, like maybe they're listening to this podcast, I know a lot of people that are in the sexual slavery, or their kids, or someone that has kids that might be in vulnerable situations, how can they protect themselves, or how can they get out of it? How can they escape it? I know it's like the children that disappear, like less than 1%, I heard, or something, that are actually able to get themselves out of it. What could you say to somebody that is looking to escape this, or to protect their kids from it?
So I guess the first thing is, we have to educate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to put up all those sites so people will be able to educate, themselves on, what it is. And there's so much free information now. Like none of this, I didn't have access to any of this. There are wonderful organizations that, if you're in a domestic violence situation, if you're just in a dysfunctional situation, that you just have to take responsibility for yourself and just keep calling. Don't give up. If you get no's, or you get the runaround, or there's no rooms available, or whatever, just keep doing it. Churches are faith-based organizations, generally speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have some great resources. Your state's social worker. So every state has, like, the state works for the state attorney, the general attorney's office has a state social worker. Call the social worker. Just keep calling until you get the help, the right help that you need. Sometimes I had to rent a room, and I would do that. I couldn't afford an apartment, but I would rent a room for a little while, put my stuff in storage and rent a room. You just have to get creative, but it's doable because there are thousands of us who have escaped that from where you are to where you want to be. That is a very difficult bridge. And it shouldn't be, but we really don't have the resources. They're not easy. They're not easily, they're not really, there's not a ton of them out there. The ones that are out there aren't easily accessible. That's where single women, people who have older people whose kids have gone, who have extra rooms, letting the private sector really needs to merge with the state and being able to offer safe places for women to go. 6 months ago, there were only 12 beds in all of New England for adult survivors wanting to flee sex trafficking. And all of New England, there was only one place that would allow children. Mm. Domestic violence is different than sex trafficking, and sex trafficking women don't do well in domestic violence shelters. They have to have something completely different. Domestic violence shelters are only manned 9 to 5 and not on weekends. And sex trafficked houses are 24/7 because those girls need that support. So in Maine, we have, I want to say 8 beds, I think, maybe 9 beds available, but only for women and not their children. So it's going to be difficult. If you are a survivor and you are wanting to escape, and maybe it's not full-blown sex trafficking, maybe you're just being sexually exploited, maybe they don't have a gun to your head, but you don't feel like you have any way out, you're going to have to fight for yourself. There's no knight in shining armor, male or female, who's going to fly down and get you out of your situation. No one's going to say, here you go, here's a bet. It's unfortunate. I want to be able to paint a better picture and say, oh, if you want out, here's a phone number. And they're going to just take you and it's going to be great. That's not reality. Unfortunately, you're going to have to make a bunch of phone calls and you're going to say the same story over and over again. And it's going to be frustrating and you're going to want to give up and just keep moving forward. And as far as your second question about children, how to educate children, how to keep your children safe, there is so much great information out there. Unlike the sex trafficking thing, keeping your children safe, there is a plethora of information that's out there that they'll have access to the links. Thorn, one of our our movie star guys, Kutcher, said, hey, this sucks. What do you mean all these people are like doing child pornography on the internet? I want to be a part of the solution. So he and at the time, Demi Moore created THORN, and all they do is cyber stuff. And he did an interview. I think it's a YouTube video that people can check out where he's saying, I'm an actor and Homeland Security is coming to me asking me for help. He's like, what's up with that? So because he's created really something pretty fantastic and anything cyber related, your guests will be able to go to that thorn.org website and learn so much. Missing and exploited children, people might remember Adam Walsh. Mm-hmm. Son disappeared. He was every Sunday night, he was on television talking about missing children. Well, now that organization has flourished. And not only does he have the National for Missing and Exploited Children organization, which is one of the best in the country, but a part of that, they're kind of cheesy videos, but very informative. And all of my cyber people, statewide, nationwide, global-wide, say that his videos are the best. So on the missing and exploited children, they've created this thing called Net Smarts, and it's a bunch of videos that are for parents, grandparents, teachers, and then they have some for the kids themselves. And it's these little cartoons with different scenarios where children have to see the danger and how to handle the danger when it's happening. It's NETZSMARTZ, and you'll see that should be in your list.
Okay.
As well. From darkness to light. If you, From Darkness to Light, that's a Christian website. It is bar none. It is a fantastic website, and you have that too on your list.
Mm-hmm.
One really, it offers training, not only training for what to look for and what to say and how to whatever, but they also have on there now a whole thing about COVID. So, for instance, people aren't getting to see children face to face, right, anymore, and sometimes there's this parent and behind them, sort of, they're on with their teacher, or they're on with their social worker or whatever, and the parent is right there, so the kid really can't say much. But when you know what to look for instance, when children are talking on Zoom, if they raise their arm to put, like, how sometimes children put their elbow on the table and rest their head, the forearm, when a child is being physically beaten, one of the first things they do is cover their face, cover their head. And so their forearms are the ones that show the markings from abuse. So the kid's face might be fine, he's talking to you, but then you see these marks on their forearms, that's a red flag. If you see a little bit of blood in the child's ear when they're on the Zoom call, that's another indicator that they're being whacked in the head. Sometimes the children are being pulled around the house by their hair. So there'll be blotches of hair missing on their head. That's something to look for. So different things that you wouldn't necessarily know without being trained to look for. They cover these things, and then what to say, what not to say, and who to call. Mm-hmm. So just fantastic resources out there. And for those parents, grandparents, step parents who were sexually abused themselves as a child and don't know what's appropriate sexually with children in the house because that wasn't modeled for them. So if healthy sexuality wasn't modeled for you, you're walking around with a lot of shame. You freak out when your child walks in the bathroom because maybe something happened to you in the bathroom when you were a kid. You're passing on this generational trauma, right? Because your reaction, or how long like men will say, I love my daughter, she's 8 now, can I still spoon with her on the couch watching TV? Like, am I gonna, is this wrong? And, can I still give my child a bath? Like, they have all this shame and they're afraid to ask questions about it. One of the links I've given you is with Jennifer Wiesner. Jennifer Wiesner was the first female sex therapist in the state of Maine. And her tagline is taking the shame out of Maine. She always giggles when she says that. Anyway, her or somebody else who's a sex therapist who can talk to you, what do you say when your child has an erection? What do you say when your little girl is masturbating and she's humping her doll or something, and the parent is freaking out, oh my God, my child, my little baby, my is having, whatever. We don't want to freak kids out. We just want it. And they pick up our energy, and as we're trying to teach them on how to have boundaries and be appropriate, simple things like, somebody does come over to your house and your toddler doesn't want to be held, taking that as an opportunity, a teaching moment to say that, hey, Mary, you can high five, you can fist bump, you can handshake, or you can just say, hi, nice to meet you. Teaching them that young that they don't have to be touched if they don't want to be touched. Mm-hmm. Teaching healthy boundaries. So there's I've rambled on and on and on, but I'm trying to give you just skimming the top of a lot of different things. I've got, years and years and years and countless hours under my belt, and I'm trying to condense it all and glaze over just key points that I think that would be really helpful for your listeners. But really, this is just 101, and deep dives can go into any of the websites and links that you're giving your folks. First, they can always reach out to me directly through stoptraffickingus.org if they want to, talk more or chat more. But
Yeah, thank you.
How are you doing?
I think, wow, incredible, Catherine. And you answered my next question, how they can find you. They can, of course, go by your website, and I'll put them in the show notes as well, of course. So stoptraffickingus.org, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And then they can reach out to you. And you've got some projects, that one that you're involved in, ACE, right?
Well, the project is the faith-based organization
Okay.
now, but I also work with survivors. So when people ask me what they can do, I ask them, do you feel like what you've learned from me is worth a cup of coffee? Like, do you think that what I'm doing would be worth you, have taking me out for coffee once a month?
Mm-hmm.
If you do, would you consider giving $5 or $10 a month? Just going to that stoptrafficking.org and donating $5 or $10 a month would have such a significant impact on the work that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was, during COVID, it was $600 that I gave to some survivors who need a little extra money. One survivor was having severe post-traumatic symptoms, and the medication wasn't cutting it, and she was worried about her own addiction. So I bought this little device for $350 from Apollo Neuroscience that helps calm you down and helps you sleep. Actually, Tony Robbins' son told us about it on a mastermind, and so I researched the company and bought that for her. So if survivors or girls at risk need something, I'm a point for them.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the projects that we're doing are incredible and worth that cup of coffee. And then the coaching that I do as well, I mainly work with women who've already done a ton of work, but maybe something's come up for them, particularly during COVID. That feeling of out of control can really bring up stuff for them. And so I've had an increase and I'm doing it on Zoom, which is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
So anywhere in the country now, instead of just the people locally. So it's been a really a terrific opportunity to get to serve in even a greater way. One of the interviews I was on, it was nearly 2,000 people got to see it. And so instead of me speaking in front of 200 people, thanks to people like you are giving me the platform to reach even more, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when media is used correctly, like the internet can be such a powerful tool. And like you said, you're hitting like a much bigger audience and getting your message across. And for that, we're so grateful. The world is grateful to you. I'm grateful to you and all the women, men, and all the people that you're educating. So thank you, Catherine. I want to just end up with what I ask all my guests is, what does an awakened heart mean to you? What does it mean to live with an awakened heart?
Well, for me, an awakened heart means a conscious connection to source. That feeling aligned when I feel like my energetic feet are deep in the earth and my energetic crown chakra is like a little sunroof that's open and there's just like this light coming from universal intelligence that I'm with spirit and I'm grounded in earth and I'm being a conduit of love and light on this planet. That I am aware that we are all connected in love and my responsibility for being that conduit of loving kindness with healthy boundaries
Of course.
on this planet. And it's funny that that's my prayer every morning is how can I be even greater, even better, even clearer conduit of that awakened consciousness, Christ mind in this planet.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Because that's all we are. All we can do is get out of our own way and allow that source energy to move through us.
Absolutely.
Conduit. We're conduits.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my highest aspiration.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we all have something to give. It's not, I've made a ton of money, but that didn't fulfill me. What fulfills me is having purpose and meaning and that connectedness and feeling like I'm being used by God in a way that's appropriate for me and my story.
Mm-hmm.
I easily do. What can I share with grace and ease and joy?
Mm-hmm.
And so when people are thinking about what they want to give, what they want to do with their lives, I just tell them, what brings you to your knees? What is yours to give? And you'll know because that is the thing that just breaks your heart. And for me, it's children.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make Mr. Rogers proud.
Oh, I love Mr. Rogers.
Right? Like, I want to be Mr. Rogers. Like, who do I want to meet when I die? Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
I
Yes.
want him to be proud of me.
He's proud of you. He's looking down from above.
Right? Save children. Save children. Let them be kids. Let children be kids. You know? Yeah.
Yes. And that's a little bit of what's sad right now with all the COVID. I feel so bad for the children. You know, they've got these masks on and they're not able to play. And a lot of them are learning to be afraid of people, which is kind of sad as far as, you know, a little afraid of them because of the mask thing and everything. But children aren't really able to be children right now because of that as well. But yeah, let children be children.
Let children be children.
Yeah.
Thank you for this.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And like I said, we'll put everything in the show notes so people can look you up and get all these resources that they to themselves can either get themselves out of a situation or educate themselves to keep them and their loved ones safe and to help as little or as much as they can. So again, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful rest of the day.
Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Awaken Heart podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, share it with a friend. And if you haven't already, head on over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, you can reach me at theawakenheartpodcast.com.